Hello friends, welcome to the Angular interview question tutorial series. In this tutorial series, we are going to see some important questions and the answer which generally ask while the interview when we give interview for the Angular development. So there are some common questions which I have uh, covered here, and we are going to find out the output, or we can say the answer for those important questions. So the question is like, first of all, like, what is Angular framework? So basically this Angular is a client side, or we can say the front side JavaScript framework which is designed by the Google, and it is used to make client side application using the HTML and JavaScript, or we can say using the TypeScript, and then it compiled to the JavaScript. Like we everyone know, like browser understand only the JavaScript language, so this Angular is written in the TypeScript, and then later it is compile this TypeScript code into the JavaScript, and it show the result on the browser. So that is the basically a Angular framework. Like it's a basically a front side TypeScript framework which is designed by the Google, and we make it the client side application using the HTML or the TypeScript. So that is the Angular framework. And the next question is basically why we use the Angular. So for developing a web application using jQuery or JavaScript is difficult. So Angular came as front end framework to reusable the library. Like if we create a web application using the JavaScript or jQuery or the HTML, then we feel some difficulty because there it is we have to use the server side and the client side application. But in the Angular it is a framework which is a component based framework, and here there are some library those we can reuse. The main important goal was to separate the client side from the server side. So that is the important thing. Like for the client side it is a totally different for the client side only, and the development of client side and the server side together is very complicated. So what Google thought, to create a different language for the client side only, so Angular came in market. And the next is the structure of development needed to be improved. Everything should be in proper order, from the user interface design through writing business logic or testing, and this is why we use the Angular. So basically this Angular is a in a structure form they have written. So working with this uh, Angular, it is very efficient and very useful. And the next is advantage of the Angular. So there are some advantage when we use the Angular, like develop across all platform. So learn one way to build application with Angular and reuse your code and ability to build application for any deployment target, for web, like for web, for mobile web and native mobile and the native desktop. So all the platform this Angular support, and the speed and the performance is good for this Angular, and it is basically a architectural way, so it improve the architecture. And this Angular is written in the TypeScripting, so it's very efficient to work with the Angular, and it support the mobile application as well, and it is basically a component based UI, and it's a SEO friendly. So these are the advantage of using the Angular. And the next is, what is basically a Angular module? That is generally asked in the interview, like what is the module in Angular? So Angular module is a combination, or we can say the group of component, directive, pipes and the services that are related to the application. So like when we create any component and directive, so the collection of all these things is called the module. If we are going to design an application and that application contain multiple portal, like suppose I want to create one college management system, then there can be multiple portal, like one is the teacher portal, one is the student portal, another is the TPO portal. So there can be a multiple portal, and for those portal we can create a different module. So basically if that kind of scenario we create the module that is called features module. So that is the thing with the module. And to able to define module, we have to use the decorator ng module. Like if we are going to create any module, then that class, or we can say the file, should be decorated with the ng module decorator. And if we want to create the module, then there is a command called ng, g for generate, m for module, and the module name. So I am going to show like what is the module in our Visual Studio Code. So when you will go to the Visual Studio Code, we have one module called app.module.ts. Here we can see like this is a module file, and it is decorated with the ng module decorator, and decorator is contain the @ keyword. And here we can see like it is a combination of the modules. Here in the input we write all the module, and here is the component. Like I have created student component, a student detail component. So here it contains the component as well, and we can see like one bootstrap. So if we have any service, that service we have to define under this provider, like this is a provider. And if we have any pipe, that also we have to define it here. So basically what I'm trying to say is like module is a combination of the like component, services, and the pipe, and all this. So that is called Angular module. Next is the Angular component. So Angular is a component based architecture. Like as I explained before, this Angular is basically a component based architecture. An Angular application is a collection of the component, and a component handle one view, or we can say one HTML page. Like when we create a component, it contain some file, like one is the CSS file, HTML file, and the specification file, and the component file. So that is basically a component. An Angular component control a part of UI of your application. Like for an example, the header, footer, or whole page can all be component, or like we have footer, header, we can create two different component for this, or we can have one component also. So that basically on your reusability, or in the way you want your code, you can make it based on your component. So a component is a TypeScript class which is decorated with the @. Like if we have any decorated, so that should be decorated with the @. So it contains some three files in this component. One is the selector, next is the template URL, and the style URL. Like this selector that tell Angular to create and insert an instance of this component wherever it find the corresponding tag in the HTML template HTML. Like it is basically like I will show in the application. Like this is a component, and it is decorated with the @ component, and it contain the three files like selector, template URL, and the style URL. So what I'm trying to say for the selector is like it is taking app student. So basically wherever it find this selector, it will sit there and will show the same component. So that is the first thing. Like when we open this application, so first of all what we first of all this like app.component.ts show on the browser, because here selector is the app root. And where this app root is defined, it defined when you go in the index.html page. Here we can see the app root. So that's why this app.component.ts so what I'm trying to say, this app student is basically a placeholder. It just keep this component page to that view, and we can see on the browser. So basically this component contain like selector, template URL. Next is the template URL. Like it has respective HTML file which where we can design our form. Like I have this student component HTML, so here we can define anything which we want respect to this student detail. And same it has the style dot like style component.css file. So that is the basically component in Angular. And if you want to create a component, then there is a command called ng g c and component name. So that is the Angular component. Next is what is Angular Directive. So directive are used to manipulate the DOM basically object document object module, and directive are element which used to change the appearance, behavior or the layout of the DOM element, and it also help to extend HTML as well. Like how it change the behavior, like if any there is any CSS and we want to put anything in tag in the HTML, so it is changing the behavior of the element, or we can say the page on the browser. So that is basically a directive. So basically there are three type of directive exist in Angular. First is the component directive. Like this directive is used in the main class, and this directive contains the detail how components should proceed and how it should use at the runtime. Like if we want to change something at the runtime on the browser, so that is done using the component directive. An Angular application has at least one component which is attached with a template along with the behavior. Like as I explained, like what is the component. So basically Angular is a component based architecture, so there should be at least one component to show on the browser, because component contain the respective HTML, so based on that it show on the browser. So that is the first thing. Like directive has one is the type is component directive, and next is the structural directive. Like based on some condition, if we want to change or manipulate the behavior of the DOM, we use the structural directive like ng if, ng switch and ng for. And next is the attribute directive. Like if we want to put any CSS to the tag or any element, then we have the attribute directive like ng class directive and ng style directive. All these things we have seen using an example in the Angular tutorial series. So I recommended you please go and watch Angular 8 tutorial series. There we have seen all these things using an example, like how we implement all these things in our Angular application. And the next is the Angular routing. So routing is a mechanism that is used to communicate between the component, and based on that it show the respective page on the browser. Or we can say like Angular router used to navigate between view or pages that trigger by the user action. Like in the root config file we define the path and the component, like on which component it should show on the browser. So that is the basically a routing. So routing we import from the router library. We import this router, and suppose when we click on any button, so it hit to the some URL, and that URL we give under the routing module class, and there we define under the this route array, and we give the matching path. Like if you want to show, I can show you. Like we have one app.routing.module.ts. Here we have given path. So the path we have given as a student, we can give anything whichever you want. So I have given the path name and the component, like when I click on this path, this URL, then where it should go. So we have to go on the respective component. So in that way we define the routing module. So that's the thing. Then later what we have to take this path under in the HTML page. Like here I have taken like router link the student. So in this way this routing works. So in the more detail I have already explained in the part 21 of Angular 8 tutorial series. So please go and watch like in a practical way how we use this Angular routing. And next is the service. Like in Angular, service are always a singleton object. What is the meaning of singleton? Like once we create an instance of that object, then there is no need to create another object of that. So that is the singleton. Basically it's a design pattern. So once we create the object of that, the life cycle of that object will be until the application exists or doesn't close. So every Angular service contain method that always contain the data throughout the life of an application. So that is the Angular service, and it's a mechanism to share the responsibility within one or multiple component. Like if I have created any function under this service, I can use that function in any component. An Angular service is basically a function. Like we this service, we basically it's a function. Inside that we write our logic, and it help us to maintain code reusability. What is the meaning of this? As I explained, like this, in this service we define the methods and we can use that method anywhere, like anywhere in the sense in any component, so it maintain the code reusability. So that's the thing. And if we have code at one place, so the unit testing will be easy to test. And if we want, what is the command, like if we want to create a service, then ng g and s for service, and the service name is the command to create a service. And you can watch part 24 of the Angular 8 tutorial series to learn more about this Angular service. Like I will show a little example of this. Like I have already created one Angular service. So what I created here, like first in service, it is decorated with the @injectable. So that is the important. And here we have function like student service, and here I have created a one function called get student details, and it's a observable type. So this function I can use anywhere in the component, between the components. So that is the service. And the next is, what is Angular pipe? So Angular provides some filters known as pipe, which is used to format or transform data to desired output. What is the meaning of transform or the data? Like if I am using any pipe, then what happened, like I have a age, but I want to do some modification of this age. Like what I want to do, I want to create a one pipe, like if it is the age is greater than 20, then I want to show some alert message. So kind of scenario we use, like we make the transformation of the desired output, like based some output we want. So kind of scenario we can do using the pipe. So basically pipe are used with the this symbol, this pipe symbol, and it take an input and return desired format output, like whatever the output we want, in that format we want. Like for example, if we given input by user, we want to show in uppercase, like I have given a small letter of name, but I want as a upper letter, so we can do using the pipe. And Angular provide many built-in type pipe also, which is used to translate data into the desired output, and we can create a custom pipe as well. Like all these things we have seen in the part 19 and 20 of Angular 8 tutorial series, like what is the custom pipe also, and what is the built-in type given by the Angular. So they basically there are two type of pipe. One is the built-in type and another is the custom pipe. Like in built-in pipe we have parameterized pipe as well and multiple pipe as well. Like we can use multiple pipe for an element also. So basically this is also change the format of the data. So that is the Angular pipe. And next is the, what is Angular dependency injection. So dependency injection is always one of the main benefit of the Angular framework. Like it's a technique where one object is depend on the another object. In Angular, dependency is an object that is used as a service. So basically this dependency injection is a design pattern, like where class receive their dependency from external resource rather than creating myself. Like in this picture what we can see, this class B is depend on the class A. Like before executing anything on this class B, first class A should uh, um, like return output for the, that will be the input for the class B. So basically this class B is depend on the class A. And same thing we have learned briefly using an example in the part 25 of the Angular 8 tutorial series. And the next is Angular data binding. So what is the data binding means? The communication between the component and the HTML page, or we can say like it's a communication between the TypeScript code, because as I explained, like component code is written in the TypeScripting. So it's a communication between the component, or what we can say, the TypeScript code of component and the HTML page, which is users see on the browser. So the data binding, basically there are two types, one-way data binding and two-way data binding. So in the one-way data binding, like string interpolation, property binding, style binding, class binding and attribute binding are the type of the one-way data binding. And one of the type I can show you, like interpolation data binding, which I can show you. Like this is a thing, like if we put this double curly braces, it means it's a interpolation data binding. But in briefly we already have seen in part 12 of Angular 8. So what is two-way data binding? Like in one-way data binding, when we change element in HTML file, then it doesn't reflect to the component file. And same problem. So to cover this problem, like if we change anything in HTML, it doesn't reflect on the component. So that problem is overcome by the two-way data binding. What is here? If we change anything in the HTML, it change in the component, and if we change anything in the component, it reflect to the HTML page. So that is the two-way data binding. So basically the combination of property binding and the event binding is called the two-way data binding. So we have seen all type of this binding in briefly in this Angular 8 tutorial series. So I recommend you please go and see the different type of binding in the Angular. And the next is come as a Angular forms. Like when we design a application in Angular, so basically we can design that Angular in a two types, like that is the template driven forms, or we can say the reactive form. So Angular form are used to collect the data based on the user input, and we can use Angular form for user to log in registration page. Like any page we want to create, like login page, registration page, any page we want to create, we can create using two types of form. Like one is the template driven form and another is the reactive form, and both type of form are used to collect user input, validate the user input, and create a form module and the data module to update. So that is the like Angular form. So you can go and see Angular form tutorial series where we have learned briefly and the different type of this Angular form module in Angular. So basically there are two types. One is the Angular template driven form, and template driven form are simply forms. It is good if we create a simple form to your application. Like in an application, if we want to create a simple form, then we can go with the template driven form. But if it is a complex form, then always we should go with the reactive forms. And in template driven form, we do most of the work on the template side. Like when we are going to work with the template driven form, in the HTML side we do the most of the work. And template driven form are easy to use, but they are not scalable as reactive form, because reactive form is used for the complex type of scenario. So it's a good for the simple scenario, not for the complex scenario. So very less code in the component side, and in unit test is difficult in it because we have very less code in the component side, so it's very difficult to testing. And what is prerequisite for this template driven form? Like need to import form module in the app.module.ts file. So that is the prerequisite to use this template driven form. So for that we have like as I explained in briefly, you can go in the Angular form tutorial series. And the next is the reactive form. Like it's better than the template driven form, and we can use it for the complex type of scenario. And reactive form are more scalable, reusable, and the testable, and there is no any data binding done, and mostly code is done in the component side. So that is the some things about reactive forms. And the prerequisite for this is like we have to import reactive form module in the app.module.ts file. So that is the reactive form. And the next is what is Angular compiling and the transpiler. So what is compiler? Like compiling is a term of transforming one source code language to the another. So that is the compiler. And what is transpiling? Like it's a process of converting JavaScript code into the JavaScript by using like JS compiler. So basically it's a process of converting TypeScript code into the JavaScript code using the JS compiler, and the JS compiler is the transfer. And the next is like what is JIT and AOT compilation. So Angular compile component to native JavaScript and the HTML. There are two type of compilation. One is the just in time, like the compilation happen on the user browser at the runtime, that is done using the just in time. And what is the AOT? Ahead of time means the application is compiled and optimized at the build time instead of the runtime. So it is improve the rendering of the application UI. And what is tracer compiler? Like it compile ECMA script addition means ES6 code to the regular JavaScript means ES5 to make it compatible to the browser. So if you have any question related to all this, or any other question or doubt if you have, please comment. Thank you. We are going to come with the next part of this Angular important question and answer. So if you have any question or if you want to know any concept, please comment. Thank you.